the conversation here on the Chris Berg Show is always about what can we do so that you can have more liberty, so you can have more sovereignty, so you can have more freedom. And so we're going to continue that conversation today in regards to what's happening in Minnesota and our great ag producers. Now, before I bring in our guest, I want to share with you, many of you know, every election season, there's this thing called Farm Fest in Redwood County, Minnesota. It's typically where kind of the big races, if you will, all the candidates get together and they do a debate. Well, that happened recently. There was the Farm Fest and the gubernatorial debate between Dr. Scott Jensen and now Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. And so after the event, Steve Porter, our guest, that I'm going to introduce you to in here in a moment, had a chance to visit with Governor Walz. This was captured on video. It's up on Twitter. It's got nearly 30,000 views, so it's got some legs on it. I want to share with you a little bit of this conversation, and then we'll bring in Steve, our guest.
Wiped out my 30-year-old farm. Your
Which agency?
The DNR has wiped out my 30-year-old.
What did they do?
I've got a healthy white-tailed deer farm. I don't have disease. I don't have any disease.
Board of Animal Health.
No, it's the DNR. It's the DNR, and they're destroying my industry. I worked 30 years in law enforcement. I'm a retired sheriff. I've followed the rule of law, and the Minnesota DNR does a blanket-wide shutdown of any deer movement. I have an entertainment business.
Yeah, we did when CWD came.
And I can't fulfill contracts. I have a closed herd.
What about their industry and the outdoor industry?
I have a closed herd. I haven't brought a new animal on my farm in 15 years. I'm USDA certified. I call Bob Meyer. And I say, Bob, I'm going to miss out on a $25,000 contract. Sorry, Steve, you're shut down for 30 days. I need to leave on the 28th day of a ban. Nope, you're shut down. My kids are running from my farm, and it's under. I'm sorry, your DNR is hostile.
What does this sound like to you? Just think for a moment. What does this sound like to you? What's happening right now with this farmer?
Policies have been in place.
I would like to. This is the first time I've ever been able to talk to you.
What's your suggestion around CWD?
The suggestion is let the USDA and the Minnesota Board of Animal Health do their job instead of a blanket statewide shutdown of clean, healthy industries. When we have a TB outbreak in cows, what do? We shut down the TB-infected cow herd, and anybody that bought and sold.
Well, we're trying to get more clarification from the
what's happened is I have a clean.
Notice how he says a blanket shutdown on all these industries of all these smart farms. Again, what does that sound like to you? Remember Governor Tim Walz, when he had emergency powers, what he was doing to small businesses in that state. I've said this before. You and I both know it in our heart and our bones. We now live in a corporatocracy. So join us now is Steve Porter. He's the owner of Porter's Trophy Whitetail. As he mentioned in that video there, former sheriff. He understands law. So, Steve, welcome to the show. You and I had a chance to visit earlier today. I guess the first question for you is, anybody from the Minnesota DNR or anyone from the Walz administration reached out to you since this conversation?
Nope, and I've actually asked for meetings with the DNR off and on for the last couple of years, and you can't have a meeting with the DNR. They just want to do things their way.
I mean, that seems a little bit like hyperbole. What do you mean you can't have a meeting with the DNR?
We've tried to line up a meeting with the DNR. They wanted to be our regulatory agency in the deer farm industry, and we said, well, if you're our regulatory agency, let's have a meeting and let's sit down and discuss some issues. And they've denied us a meeting. They told us they'd give us 4 minutes with some staff. We had to write down what all our questions were. And, it was so restricted, it wasn't even going to be productive, and we could meet with some low-level people. So anyway, the DNR is not interested in what we have to say as agricultural people.
And I guess what I want to answer my own question for our audience before we go on to the next thing is, this sounds to me, it just sounds just like COVID. I mean, here you've got a governor of the administration shutting down, according to what you're saying to the governor, perfectly fine business. There's no disease on your deer farm. So just share with people specifically, CWD, the governor brought up to you. What is that exactly, and what specifically is happening within your farm that is shutting you down?
Sure. So I worked in law enforcement for 29 and a half years. I retired as sheriff. In the same time, I built a farm, a white-tailed deer farm, and CWD, chronic wasting disease. It's prevalent in Wisconsin and many, many states. It's all over the place. It's a serious enough disease. I don't want it. I don't have it. I've tested 150 brain stems. I'm following USDA protocol, disease monitoring. I don't have it. I closed my herd. I don't buy new animals and bring them on. And Walz and the DNR, they get a case of CWD that pops up somewhere. They'll do a ban on any and all movement. And I can't move my deer. I have an entertainment business. I bring live trophy bucks to sports shows all over the upper Midwest. They've got contracts in place. It's a big deal to me. And they just say, no, you can't move your deer for 30 days, forfeit your contracts. But I haven't been in contact with any diseased deer, and I got a closed herd, and I got healthy animals, and I can prove it. No, sorry, you're shut down, forfeit your contracts. Then they did an 18-month ban. They thought that would be clever, that we can't sell or move our animals for 18 months. Well, if you were to go to a cattle farmer and say, hey, there was TB down by Rochester, so you up here in Grand Forks or Fargo or anywhere surrounding area, you can't sell your cows for 18 months. Just keep them and feed them. And that's the nonsense that we're being dealt. And I know I have a deer farm, and people are wondering, well, who in the heck raises deer? But I started researching it, and it's agriculture of every type is under assault.
I want to get to that in a moment. I mean, interrupt you,
Yep.
sir, but I do want to get to this. So the CWD, chronic waste and disease, they're shutting you down potentially, if I understand you, potentially because of that. The question then, again, because you go to COVID, and if I were to go out and harvest a deer that had CWD and ate that deer meat, would I die? Do I die? What happens?
Yeah. So Wisconsin, if you do the math, since like 2002, they estimate they've had 100,000 cases of CWD. If you extrapolate the math forward to the number of deer tested positive and that percentage of the annual harvest versus what was really harvested, they're guessing it was 100,000 animals with CWD. There's no known cases. There's no science. There's nothing that says it can affect the human if you're eating the meat. However, if you noticed a deer was sick, nobody would want to eat a sick animal. It's just a good practice. So this disease, I think it blows around in the wind. I mean, nobody really knows. They've made deer farms the villain. The DNR doesn't like us. Walz doesn't like us. And they're shutting down clean, healthy farms. They say, well, we're fighting disease. But that's kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod, because you're not fighting disease. You're just harming industry. You're harming businesses and farms and families that were built and are depending on income to make a living and feed their animals. And they're just stripping us of our income, laughing, saying, well, you can keep raising deer. We just cut off all your revenue streams. You keep raising them. That's fine. But you're not going to make any money under us.
If you're just joining us, Steve Porter, he's the owner of Porter's Trophy Whitetail, sharing his point of view on the war on ag in Minnesota. When you think about it, I mean, ag is such a giant industry in Minnesota. I don't know what number it falls under, but it's a big industry there. Why? Why would the Walz administration try to restrict ag or have a war on ag?
That's a good question. I don't fully have the answer to that, but I was trying to figure that out. And I've been talking to a lot of farmers. Like I said, I was in law enforcement. I know a lot of people. My Facebook page has like 30,000 followers, and people reach out to me on a regular basis, and they'll complain and talk about things that are happening and the war on agriculture to tie them up so bad they can't even make a living. So we did have a roundtable with 30 different farmers, and it's not just deer farmers that are being run out of business. I had a guy in the room who has 21 irrigation heads. He farms about 4,000 acres, and he has to irrigate his crops. And he put in a new wellhead, and he has to apply to, who do you guess has to give him a permit to turn on his well? The Minnesota DNR's got their fingers in that, and they dragged their feet. No, we're not going to give you a permit. It was 3 years. They wouldn't give him a permit to irrigate his cornfields. Well, he doesn't get a good crop if he's not irrigating. And so he finally told the DNR, I'm going out there and turning my wellhead on. I'm going to protect it with my life. It's been 3 years. This has gone on long enough. He went out there and turned it on, and nobody shows up. A month later, he gets a permit in the mail. 3 years and a month to get a permit to irrigate his crops.
Wow.
And I can go on and on and on. For every type of agriculture that you can think of, they're under attack by a weaponized Minnesota DNR. And I love law enforcement, you guys. I worked 30 years in law enforcement. We need cops. We need law enforcement to protect. There are bad people out there, and there are good people in the Minnesota DNR. There are good officers, but they're given marching orders on what they're supposed to do. And at the end result is it's an attack on agriculture.
It just seems to be happening everywhere. I mean, you see how the finances is drying up in ag as well because of the ESG conversation, and here you are just trying to, grow and harvest some deer and have a business, and yet it seems like it's being restricted. So, Steve Porter, we really, really appreciate it. Again, Porter's Trophy Whitetail. I know we'll have you back, sir, because ag is such an important part of a conversation here within our community. So, thank you. Keep up the good fight. Okay.
I will. Thank you much. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Again,
you.
Steve Porter, Porter's Trophy Whitetail. You can check him out on Facebook, like you mentioned. He's got over 30,000 followers there, so big audience. And you can hear more about his story and what is happening to hinder his opportunity for industry here in the great state